You know that feeling when you watch a line of dominoes fall? That simple, almost hypnotic, and totally unstoppable chain reaction? Well, it's a really powerful visual, right? So powerful, in fact, that it became a metaphor that shaped global policy for decades. And, as we're about to see, it found this incredible, almost eerie echo in modern science. All right, let's get into it.
So, picture this. It's 1954. The US President, Dwight D. Eisenhower, is talking to the press. And with these exact words, he gives a name to a fear that was really gripping the Western world. And he wasn't talking about a game, of course. He was talking about the spread of communism. And this falling domino idea of his, well, it would become one of the most influential concepts of the entire Cold War.
So, what was the domino theory exactly? At its heart, it was this idea of political contagion. The theory was if one country falls to communism, its neighbors would just inevitably be next. They'd topple one by one in this relentless chain reaction, just like dominoes.
But a theory like this doesn't just pop out of nowhere. It was really forged in the anxieties of a world that was still reeling from World War II, a world that was splitting, fast, into two completely opposite camps. Now, what's just wild when you look at this slide is the sheer speed of these events. I mean, in just 5 years, you have the Iron Curtain falling, you have the U.S. policy of containment being born with the Truman Doctrine, the most populous country on Earth, China, becomes communist, and then a full-blown hot war breaks out in Korea. From a Western point of view, it absolutely looked like the dominoes were already starting to tip over.
And this is the really crucial point. This wasn't just some abstract idea debated in classrooms. No, the domino theory became the official justification for a very real policy of intervention. It was the reason, the rationale for sending money and weapons and eventually troops to these faraway places, all to prop up what they saw as the next domino in line. And that logic, well, it led directly into the jungles of Vietnam.
But was the theory actually right? As America got deeper and deeper into Southeast Asia, this became one of the most fiercely debated questions of the entire century. And the answer? Well, it's a lot more complicated than you might think.
Okay, so on the one hand, when Saigon fell in 1975 and then Laos and Cambodia quickly followed under communist rule, a lot of people said, see, we told you so. They argued that U.S. intervention had at least bought time for other countries like Singapore to get stronger. But then, on the other hand, critics will point to a 1964 CIA memo that actually said the theory probably wouldn't play out like that. And decades later, one of its main architects, Robert McNamara, flat out admitted he thought it had been a mistake.
For a really long time, that's pretty much where the story of the domino theory ended, as this controversial relic of the Cold War. But this is where our explainer takes a fascinating and completely unexpected turn. We're moving from the war rooms in Washington to the world of modern ecological science.
So let's just pose a kind of provocative question here. What if Eisenhower, with his simple little analogy, accidentally stumbled onto a truth that is so much bigger than politics? What if the domino effect actually describes a universal law for how large, complex systems, like, say, our planet's ecosystems, what if it describes how they actually break down?
In science, there's a term for this kind of dramatic, system-wide collapse. It's called a regime shift. This is when a system, think of a crystal-clear lake that suddenly becomes a murky, algae-choked mess, or a vibrant coral reef that becomes a barren, dead wasteland. It's when it crosses a tipping point and just rapidly transforms into a new, stable, but usually much worse state.
And here's the kicker. Scientists who study these regime shifts have found a pattern that just completely flips our common sense on its head, especially when we're talking about the biggest, most massive systems on Earth.
This big discovery, it's all about speed. And it turns out that when it comes to a total collapse, our intuition about how long it should take is just dangerously wrong.
Okay, think about it. You'd assume a giant system, like a huge forest, would take a really, really long time to unravel, right? It should collapse way slower than, say, a small pond. But the research shows the exact opposite. Once a tipping point is hit, bigger ecosystems don't just collapse, they collapse disproportionately faster than smaller ones. So size doesn't protect you. It actually makes the breakdown happen even quicker. It's wild.
Let's look at a case study to make this real. The Amazon rainforest. We're talking about an ecosystem on a staggering scale, about 5.5 million square kilometers. It's literally called the lungs of our planet.
So, based on this new science, what's the estimated time for the Amazon to go through a massive regime shift to flip from a rainforest to more of a savanna once it's pushed past its tipping point? Just 49 years. And this just perfectly illustrates the point. A system that took millions of years to build could basically unravel in less than a single human lifetime.
Okay, let's take one more example just to hammer this home. The Caribbean coral reef system. It's a vast and complex ecosystem, for sure, but it's smaller than the Amazon, at around 20,000 square kilometers.
And its potential collapse time? A terrifyingly fast 15 years. This is not a slow, gradual decay that we can maybe fix over centuries. No, this is a rapid, cascading failure. The scientific data is showing us, in black and white, what the political theory only ever guessed at. The dominoes can fall really, really fast. So what happens when we put these two stories together? When a Cold War metaphor actually finds its proof in 21st century data? Well, we get a new, and frankly a much more urgent way of understanding the domino effect.
So let's just break it all down. The political domino theory, it was a powerful, but ultimately unproven hypothesis about how one failure could trigger a bunch of others. But now, modern science is giving us a data-driven model for that exact process. And the implications of that are huge. It suggests that any large interconnected system, doesn't matter if it's an ecosystem, a financial market, or a social network, isn't just vulnerable to collapse, it's vulnerable to a rapid collapse. The main takeaway here is that these massive changes don't happen on some geological timescale. They happen on human time, our time.
You know, the original dominoes were nations and ideologies. The new dominoes are rainforests and coral reefs and our climate systems. But that underlying principle of cascading failure, it remains terrifyingly relevant. And it leaves us with a really critical question for our deeply interconnected world. What dominoes are lined up today?